The desert heat shimmered across the rocky terrain of Afghanistan's Helmand province as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her scope for the third time that morning. The observation post overlooked a narrow valley where intelligence suggested Taliban fighters had been moving weapons through a network of caves. What nobody expected was that this routine surveillance mission would become a life-or-death moment that would echo through military command for months. Santos had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman for 8 months, serving as a sniper with the 82nd Airborne Division. Her reputation for precision shooting was well known among her unit, but she had never been given authorization for independent engagement. Military protocol was clear. Snipers required explicit permission from commanding officers before taking any shot that wasn't in immediate self-defense. The morning started like any other patrol day. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell had briefed the reconnaissance team on their mission parameters. 6 soldiers would establish an overwatch position on the ridge while a separate patrol unit moved through the valley below, searching for weapon caches that drone surveillance had identified the previous week. Remember, this is strictly reconnaissance, Colonel Mitchell emphasized during the morning briefing. We observe, we report, we do not engage unless directly threatened. The rules of engagement are crystal clear on this operation. Santos nodded along with the rest of her team. She understood the importance of following protocol, especially in a region where civilian casualties could create diplomatic incidents. The military had learned hard lessons about unauthorized engagements in the years since the conflict began. The team reached their position just as the sun climbed above the mountain peaks. Santos set up her rifle on a natural rock formation that provided excellent cover and a clear view of the valley floor. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Williams, settled beside her with binoculars and a radio to maintain contact with the patrol unit below. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The valley remained quiet except for the occasional bird flying between the rocky outcroppings. Santos tracked a few local farmers moving through distant fields, but they posed no threat and were well outside the operational area. Then, Williams spotted movement near the cave entrance they had been monitoring. "Got something," he whispered, adjusting his binoculars. 3 individuals, armed, moving toward the cave system at 2 o'clock from our position. Santos swung her scope to follow his direction. Through the powerful magnification, she could see 3 men carrying what appeared to be assault rifles. They moved with the cautious, practiced movements of trained fighters rather than local civilians. "Patrol unit, this is Overwatch," Williams spoke quietly into his radio. "We have visual on 3 armed individuals entering the target cave system. Continuing observation." The response crackled through their earpieces. "Copy, Overwatch. Maintain visual contact. We're proceeding to secondary search area as planned." What happened next would change everything. Santos watched through her scope as the 3 armed men emerged from the cave, carrying something heavy between them. As they moved into clearer view, she realized they were positioning what looked like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. "RPG team setting up," she reported to Williams, who immediately relayed the information. But the patrol unit below was too far away to see the threat developing above them. The armed men were positioning themselves on a ledge that would give them a perfect angle to attack the patrol as they moved through a narrow section of the valley. Santos could see the entire situation unfolding like a deadly puzzle. The patrol unit was following their planned route, completely unaware that enemies were positioning themselves for an ambush. The rocky terrain and communication delays meant that by the time warnings reached the patrol, it would be too late for them to take cover. "Patrol unit, this is Overwatch." Williams spoke urgently into the radio. "You have RPG team setting up for ambush on your route. Recommend immediate route change or take cover." Static filled their earpieces. The radio wasn't getting through clearly. Williams tried again, adjusting frequencies and boosting the signal strength. Santos kept her scope fixed on the men with the RPG launcher. She could see them making final adjustments, preparing for what would be a devastating attack on the 6-man patrol below. The patrol unit continued moving forward, following their predetermined path through the valley. Still no clear communication with the patrol, Williams reported, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning coolness. "Something's interfering with our signal." Through her scope, Santos watched the lead man with the RPG launcher raise the weapon to his shoulder. The patrol unit was now less than 100 meters from entering the kill zone where the rocket would be most effective. Military protocol required authorization for any engagement. Santos was supposed to request permission through the chain of command, wait for approval, and then act only if specifically ordered to do so. This process typically took several minutes, even in emergency situations. But those 6 soldiers below had no idea they were walking into an ambush. In 30 seconds, they would round a bend in the valley floor and become sitting ducks for the RPG team positioned above them. Santos made a calculation that would define the rest of her military career. She had a clear shot at the man holding the RPG launcher. The distance was well within her capabilities, and the angle was perfect. If she took the shot immediately, she could eliminate the primary threat and potentially save 6 lives. If she followed protocol and waited for authorization, 6 American soldiers would likely die in the next minute. Her finger found the trigger as she steadied her breathing. The crosshairs centered on the man with the RPG launcher, who was now taking final aim at the approaching patrol. Santos squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the valley like thunder. Through her scope, she saw the man with the RPG launcher drop instantly. The weapon clattered down the rocky slope, rendered useless. The other 2 armed men immediately dove for cover, abandoning whatever plans they had for supporting the attack. The immediate threat to the patrol unit was eliminated. What the hell? Williams stared at Santos in shock. Did you just take that shot without authorization? Before Santos could answer, their radio crackled to life with clear communication for the first time in 20 minutes. Overwatch, this is Patrol Leader. We're taking fire from the ridge above us. Can you provide supporting fire? Williams looked at Santos, then back at the valley where the patrol unit was now taking cover behind rocks, finally aware that they had been walking into danger. Patrol Leader, threat has been neutralized, Williams reported. 1 enemy Kia, others have retreated from ambush position. What followed was a confused series of radio communications as the patrol unit tried to understand what had happened and who had authorized the sniper shot that had apparently saved their lives. Santos kept her position, watching for additional threats, but the valley had gone quiet again. The 2 surviving armed men had disappeared back into the cave system, and the patrol unit was safely repositioned behind adequate cover. Within an hour, the patrol unit had completed their mission and returned to base without further incident. But as they loaded into vehicles for the return trip to forward operating base Chapman, Santos knew that her unauthorized shot would soon become the subject of intense scrutiny. Military protocol existed for important reasons, but she had made a split-second decision that she believed saved 6 lives. Whether her superiors would see it the same way remained to be seen. As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave the observation post, Williams looked at Santos with a mixture of admiration and concern. "That was some shooting," he said quietly. "But you know there's going to be hell to pay when we get back to base." Santos checked her rifle one final time before securing it for transport. 6 soldiers are going home to their families tonight, she replied. That's what matters. But even as she said it, she wondered if her military career had just ended with that single, unauthorized shot that had probably saved 6 lives. The long ride back to base would give her plenty of time to think about what came next. The convoy rolled through the desert landscape, carrying a team that had successfully completed their mission, but also carrying questions that would soon reach the highest levels of military command. Santos stared out at the passing scenery, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman felt smaller than usual as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos sat across from Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and his assembled officers. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on everyone's faces, and the air conditioning struggled against the afternoon heat that seeped through the temporary building's walls. Santos had been back at base for 6 hours, enough time for word of her unauthorized shot to spread through the command structure like wildfire. She had spent those hours writing her incident report, carefully documenting every detail of the morning's events, knowing that every word would be scrutinized. Colonel Mitchell opened the manila folder containing her report and several other documents that had been compiled since the patrol's return. His expression was unreadable as he reviewed the papers, occasionally glancing up at Santos with a stern look that had made him feared and respected throughout his 22-year military career. Staff Sergeant Santos, Mitchell began, his voice carrying the weight of command authority. Your report states that you engaged an enemy target without seeking or receiving authorization from this command. Is that accurate? Yes, sir, Santos replied, maintaining eye contact despite the uncomfortable situation. The patrol unit was in immediate danger, communication was compromised, and there wasn't time to follow standard authorization procedures. Major Patricia Hoffman, the base's operations officer, leaned forward in her chair. She had been reviewing radio transcripts and timeline data since the patrol returned. According to Corporal Williams' statement, you had visual contact with the enemy for approximately 3 minutes before taking your shot. That seems like sufficient time to request authorization through proper channels. Santos felt the weight of the moment. She had known this question would come, and she had prepared her answer carefully. Ma'am, we attempted radio contact with the patrol unit multiple times during those 3 minutes. Our communications were being jammed or blocked by terrain interference. By the time we established clear contact, the enemy was in final firing position and the patrol was entering the kill zone. Captain Rodriguez, the intelligence officer who had briefed them on the morning's mission, consulted his notes. The after-action report from the patrol confirms that they received no warning about the ambush until after the threat was eliminated. They were unaware they were walking into danger. Mitchell studied the timeline that had been reconstructed from radio logs and witness statements. The technical details supported Santos's version of events, but protocol was protocol, regardless of the circumstances. Staff Sergeant, you understand that military discipline depends on following the chain of command, especially in combat situations, Mitchell said. Snipers don't make independent decisions about when to engage the enemy. That authority rests with commanding officers who have access to broader operational intelligence and strategic considerations. Understand that, sir, Santos replied. But I also understood that 6 American soldiers were about to be killed by an RPG attack that they couldn't see coming. In that moment, I had to choose between following protocol and saving lives. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications of her statement. Military discipline required obedience to orders and respect for the chain of command. But the primary mission was protecting fellow soldiers and completing objectives that served national interests. Major Hoffman broke the silence. Santos, what if your shot had missed? What if you had hit a civilian? What if the enemy had been conducting surveillance rather than preparing to attack? Your decision could have escalated a reconnaissance mission into a full-scale firefight with unpredictable consequences. Santos had wrestled with these same questions during the long convoy ride back to base. She had run through dozens of alternative scenarios, wondering if she had made the right choice or if her split-second decision had been reckless. Ma'am, I had a clear shot at a confirmed enemy combatant who was preparing to fire an RPG at American soldiers. The target was isolated, there were no civilians in the area, and the alternative was allowing 6 soldiers to walk into an ambush. I believe then, and I believe now, that taking that shot was the right decision. Captain Rodriguez consulted another document in his folder. The patrol leader, Sergeant First Class Thompson, submitted a statement praising your action and stating that his team would have been killed or severely wounded without your intervention. He's recommending you for a commendation. Colonel Mitchell raised an eyebrow at this information. That's interesting, but it doesn't change the fact that proper procedures weren't followed. Military effectiveness depends on discipline and following orders, not on individual soldiers making tactical decisions without authorization. The discussion continued for another hour as the officers reviewed every aspect of the incident. They examined radio logs, studied topographical maps, and analyzed the timing of events down to the minute. Santos answered their questions honestly, maintaining her position that she had made the best decision possible under extreme circumstances. As the debriefing concluded, Mitchell stood and walked to the window overlooking the base's main compound. Soldiers were going about their daily routines, unaware of the serious disciplinary matter being discussed in the command building. Staff Sergeant Santos, you're an excellent soldier and an exceptional marksman, Mitchell said without turning around. Your service record is outstanding, and your actions today undoubtedly saved American lives. But you also violated direct orders and broke the chain of command in a way that could have had serious consequences. Santos waited for the verdict, knowing that her military career hung in the balance. Courts-martial had been convened for lesser violations of military protocol, and unauthorized engagement of enemy targets was a serious offense regardless of the outcome. I'm recommending that this incident be reviewed at division level, Mitchell continued. Your fate will be decided by officers with more authority and broader perspective than we have at this forward operating base. Until that review is completed, you're restricted to base and relieved of sniper duties. The restriction meant Santos would spend her remaining time at FOB Chapman doing administrative work and base maintenance rather than the specialized duties she had trained for. More importantly, it meant that higher-level commanders would be reviewing her case and deciding whether she faced court-martial proceedings. As the officers filed out of the debriefing room, Major Hoffman paused beside Santos's chair. For what it's worth, I think you made a tough decision under impossible circumstances. But the military can't function if every soldier decides when to follow orders and when to improvise. Santos nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. Military discipline wasn't just about following rules. It was about maintaining order and effectiveness in situations where split-second decisions could have far-reaching consequences. That evening, she sat in her quarters writing a letter to her family back in Texas. She couldn't tell them about the classified details of the mission, but she wanted them to know that she might be facing serious disciplinary action in the coming weeks. As she wrote, Santos reflected on the day's events and the decision that had changed everything. 6 soldiers were alive tonight because of her actions, but her own future in the military was now uncertain. She had chosen to save lives over following protocol, and now she would live with the consequences of that choice. Outside her window, the desert night was quiet except for the distant sound of helicopters returning from patrol. Tomorrow would bring new missions for other soldiers, but for Santos, it would bring the beginning of a process that would determine whether her military career would continue or end because of one perfectly placed shot that had saved 6 lives. The weight of command decisions and military justice was something she had never fully understood before, but now she was learning firsthand how the system balanced individual initiative against institutional discipline. The lesson was more complex and challenging than anything she had encountered in sniper training or combat operations. 3 weeks after the incident, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos found herself on a transport flight to Bagram Airfield, where a formal review board would determine her fate. The investigation had grown far beyond the initial debriefing at Forward Operating Base Chapman, attracting attention from Division Command and even Pentagon officials who specialized in rules of engagement cases. During those 3 weeks of restriction to base, Santos had become something of a celebrity among the enlisted soldiers at FOB Chapman. Word had spread about her unauthorized shot that saved 6 lives, and many soldiers viewed her as a hero who had put saving American lives above bureaucratic procedures. But she also knew that support from fellow enlisted personnel wouldn't carry much weight in a formal military tribunal. The flight to Bagram gave Santos time to think about how much her life had changed since that morning in the observation post. She had received letters from the families of the 6 soldiers whose lives she had saved, thanking her for her courage and quick thinking. Sergeant First Class Thompson, the patrol leader, had continued advocating for her, submitting additional statements and gathering support from other soldiers who believed she deserved recognition rather than punishment. But Santos also knew that powerful forces within the military hierarchy were concerned about the precedent her actions might set. If snipers could make independent decisions about when to engage enemies, it could undermine the entire command structure that kept military operations coordinated and effective. At Bagram, Santos was assigned temporary quarters in a building reserved for soldiers awaiting hearings or courts-martial. Her roommate was a supply sergeant facing charges for misappropriating equipment, and their conversations revealed the wide range of cases that came before military justice boards. "What's your story?" the supply sergeant asked on Santos's first night at the base. "Saved some lives by taking a shot I wasn't authorized to take," Santos replied, keeping the details minimal. The sergeant laughed bitterly. And they're putting you through the ringer for that? I've been stealing equipment for 6 months, and I'll probably just get a reduction in rank and extra duty. The military's priorities are screwed up sometimes. The comment bothered Santos more than she expected. She had always believed that the military justice system was fair and focused on important principles. Now she was beginning to understand how complex and sometimes arbitrary the system could be. 2 days later, Santos received word that her case had been assigned to a 3-officer review panel headed by Colonel Patricia Walsh, a career infantry officer with extensive combat experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. Colonel Walsh had a reputation for fairness, but also for strict adherence to military protocol and discipline. The review would examine not just the specific incident, but also the broader implications of allowing snipers to make independent engagement decisions. Military lawyers have been brought in to represent both sides, and Santos found herself working with Captain Jennifer Martinez, a JAG officer who specialized in combat-related cases. Your situation is unusual, Captain Martinez explained during their first meeting. Most unauthorized engagement cases involve soldiers who acted recklessly or out of anger. You made a calculated decision that saved lives, which complicates the legal and disciplinary aspects significantly. Martinez had been reviewing similar cases from other theaters of operation, looking for precedents that might support Santos's position. She had found several instances where soldiers received commendations for initiative that technically violated orders, but she had also found cases where soldiers faced severe punishment for similar actions that had negative consequences. The key issue, Martinez continued, is whether your actions demonstrate good military judgment under extreme circumstances or dangerous freelancing that undermines command authority. The review board will be looking at your motivations, your training, your service record, and the specific details of what happened that morning. As they prepared for the hearing, Martinez interviewed the members of Santos's patrol unit and the soldiers whose lives had been saved. The statements were consistently supportive, praising Santos's judgment and arguing that her quick action had prevented a tragedy. But Martinez also had to prepare for arguments from the prosecution, which would focus on the importance of military discipline and the dangerous precedent that could be set by excusing unauthorized actions, regardless of their positive outcomes. The hearing began on a Thursday morning in a conference room at Bugram's Legal Affairs Building. Colonel Walsh presided over the panel, flanked by Major General Robert Kim and Lieutenant Colonel Susan Davies. The room was formal and intimidating, with American flags and military insignia displayed prominently. Santos sat at a table with Captain Martinez, facing the 3-officer panel. Across from them, Major James Patterson represented the prosecution, arguing that military discipline required punishment even when unauthorized actions had positive results. Colonel Walsh called the hearing to order and outlined the scope of the review. We're here to examine the actions of Staff Sergeant Santos on October 15th and determine appropriate disciplinary measures, if any, for her unauthorized engagement of enemy forces. This review will consider the specific circumstances, the soldier's intentions, and the broader implications for military discipline and effectiveness. Major Patterson presented the prosecution's case first, emphasizing the importance of the chain of command and the dangers of allowing individual soldiers to make tactical decisions without authorization. Military effectiveness depends on coordination and discipline, Patterson argued. When soldiers decide for themselves when to follow orders and when to improvise, it creates chaos that can have catastrophic consequences. Staff Sergeant Santos violated clear protocols regardless of the positive outcome of her actions. Patterson cited several cases where unauthorized actions had led to civilian casualties, friendly fire incidents, and tactical disasters. He argued that good intentions and positive outcomes couldn't excuse violations of military protocol because those same violations could lead to disasters in different circumstances. Captain Martinez responded by presenting Santos's case, focusing on the extreme circumstances and the immediate threat to American lives. Staff Sergeant Santos faced an impossible choice, Martinez argued. Follow protocol and watch 6 soldiers die or take action to save their lives. She chose to save lives, and That choice reflects the highest values of military service. Her actions demonstrate exactly the kind of initiative and judgment that we want in our combat leaders. Martinez presented testimony from the soldiers whose lives had been saved, along with expert analysis of the tactical situation and the communication problems that had prevented normal authorization procedures. The hearing continued for 2 days as the panel examined every aspect of the incident. Santos testified on her own behalf, explaining her thought process and the split-second decision that had changed everything. "I knew I was violating protocol," Santos told the panel. "But I also knew that 6 American soldiers were about to be killed by an enemy I could stop. In that moment, saving their lives was more important than following procedures. I accept responsibility for my actions, and whatever consequences the panel determines are appropriate." Colonel Walsh asked pointed questions about Santos's training, her understanding of rules of engagement, and her consideration of alternatives to taking the unauthorized shot. Santos answered honestly, acknowledging that she had briefly considered other options but had concluded that only immediate action could prevent the impending attack on the patrol unit. As the hearing concluded, both sides presented final arguments. Major Patterson emphasized precedent and discipline, while Captain Martinez focused on judgment and results. The panel retired to deliberate, leaving Santos to wait for a decision that would determine her military future. She had presented her case as honestly as possible, and now her fate rested in the hands of 3 senior officers who had to balance competing principles of military justice and effectiveness. The waiting was the hardest part, knowing that the decision could range from a commendation for heroism to a court-martial for violating orders. Santos had learned that military justice was more complex than she had ever imagined, involving considerations that went far beyond the simple question of whether her actions had been right or wrong. The deliberation lasted 18 hours. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos spent that time walking around Bagram Airfield, trying to process everything that had happened since she pulled the trigger on that observation post 3 weeks earlier. She had gone from being a specialized sniper focused on mission completion to being the center of a military justice case that had attracted attention throughout the chain of command. Captain Martinez found Santos in the base mess hall Friday morning, drinking coffee and staring at a newspaper she wasn't really reading. "The panel's ready to announce their decision," Martinez said, sitting down across from Santos. "Whatever happens, you should know that you presented your case with dignity and honesty. That matters, regardless of the outcome." Santos nodded, feeling a mixture of anxiety and relief that the waiting was finally over. "Any indication of which way they're leaning?" "Colonel Walsh keeps her deliberations completely private," Martinez replied. "But the fact that they took so long suggests they're taking your case seriously and considering all the complexities involved." They walked together to the Legal Affairs building, where the same conference room had been prepared for the announcement of the panel's decision. Santos took her seat at the defendant's table, noticing that several additional officers had gathered in the back of the room to observe the proceedings. Colonel Walsh entered with the other panel members, carrying a folder containing their written findings. The room fell silent as she took her position at the head table. "This panel has carefully considered the evidence, testimony, and arguments presented regarding the actions of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos on October 15th, Walsh began. "We have examined the specific circumstances of the incident, the soldiers' motivations and judgment, and the broader implications for military discipline and effectiveness." Santos felt her heart racing as Walsh continued reading from the prepared statement. "The panel finds that Staff Sergeant Santos did indeed violate established protocols by engaging enemy forces without proper authorization. This violation represents a serious breach of military discipline that cannot be excused solely based on positive outcomes." Santos's stomach dropped, expecting the worst. But Walsh wasn't finished. However, the panel also finds that Staff Sergeant Santos acted with extraordinary judgment under extreme circumstances, making a split-second decision that saved the lives of 6 American soldiers. Her actions demonstrate the highest values of military service: courage, initiative, and absolute commitment to protecting fellow soldiers. The room remained silent as Walsh paused, consulting her notes before continuing. After extensive deliberation, This panel concludes that Staff Sergeant Santos's actions, while technically in violation of protocol, were justified by the extreme circumstances and the immediate threat to American lives. The communication failures that prevented normal authorization procedures were beyond her control, and her decision to engage the enemy represents sound military judgment under impossible conditions. Santos felt a wave of relief beginning to build, but she waited for the official verdict. Therefore, this panel recommends that no disciplinary action be taken against Staff Sergeant Santos. Furthermore, we recommend that she be considered for commendation for her exceptional judgment and heroism in saving the lives of 6 fellow soldiers. The room erupted in quiet murmurs as the assembled officers processed the unexpected decision. Santos felt tears forming in her eyes as the full impact of the verdict hit her. But Colonel Walsh wasn't finished with her statement. Additionally, this panel recommends that current protocols for sniper engagement be reviewed and potentially modified to provide clearer guidance for situations where communication failures prevent normal authorization procedures. Staff Sergeant Santos's case has highlighted important gaps in our current rules of engagement that should be addressed to prevent similar dilemmas in the future. Major Patterson, the prosecutor, looked surprised by the panel's comprehensive recommendations. He had expected either a guilty verdict with punishment or an acquittal, not a verdict that turned Santos's case into a catalyst for broader policy review. After the formal session concluded, Colonel Walsh approached Santos personally. "Staff Sergeant, you were placed in an impossible situation, and you handled it with exceptional judgment," Walsh said. "Your case has made us all think more carefully about the balance between discipline and initiative in combat situations. The military needs soldiers who can think and act decisively when circumstances require it." Walsh paused, studying Santos with the experienced eye of a career combat officer. "But I want you to understand something important," she continued. "Your case worked out well because your judgment was sound and your motivations were pure. If you had been wrong about the threat, or if your shot had missed and caused civilian casualties, you would be facing a very different outcome today. Independent action in combat is a privilege that comes with enormous responsibility." Santos understood the message clearly. She had been vindicated this time, but future decisions would be evaluated just as carefully, and positive outcomes weren't guaranteed. Over the following weeks, Santos learned about the broader impact of her case. The incident had prompted review of sniper protocols throughout the military, leading to new guidance that gave snipers more flexibility to engage immediate threats when communication with command was compromised. Her case also became part of the curriculum at sniper training schools, used as an example of the complex judgment calls that combat soldiers sometimes faced. Military instructors used her situation to teach new snipers about balancing protocol with initiative, emphasizing that such decisions required exceptional judgment and should never be taken lightly. 6 months later, Santos was back in Afghanistan on her second deployment, serving with a new unit that had heard about her case. Her reputation as a sniper who had saved 6 lives with an unauthorized shot had spread throughout the military community, making her both famous and respected among combat soldiers. But Santos had learned important lessons about the complexities of military service that went beyond marksmanship and tactical skills. She understood now that every decision in combat had implications that extended far beyond the immediate situation, affecting military policy, command authority, and the lives of soldiers she would never meet. The 6 soldiers whose lives she had saved remained in contact with her, sending periodic messages and updates about their families and careers. Their survival remained the most important outcome of that day in the observation post, regardless of the military justice complexities that had followed. On quiet evenings at Forward Operating Base Wilson, her new assignment, Santos sometimes thought about that moment when she had to choose between protocol and lives. She remained convinced that she had made the right decision, but she also understood the weight of command authority and the importance of military discipline in ways she never had before. The lone shot that had preserved 6 lives had also changed military policy and created new precedents for combat decision-making. Sometimes individual actions had consequences that rippled through entire institutions, creating changes that would affect soldiers for years to come. Santos continued serving as a sniper, but now she carried additional responsibility as someone whose case had influenced military policy. Young snipers sought her advice about handling complex situations, and she always emphasized the importance of sound judgment and pure motivations when facing impossible choices. The military had evolved because of her experience, creating better guidance for soldiers who found themselves in similar situations. But the fundamental challenge remained the same: balancing individual initiative with institutional discipline in life-or-death situations where split-second decisions could have far-reaching consequences. That balance would continue to be tested by future soldiers in future conflicts, but now they had clearer guidance and better support for making decisions that honored both military discipline and the sacred duty to protect fellow soldiers. Santos's unauthorized shot had become part of a larger conversation about what it meant to serve effectively in modern warfare, where individual judgment and institutional authority had to work together to achieve mission success and preserve lives.